Oklahoma Christmas Blues, Book 1 of the McIntyre Men series, written by Maggie Shane, narrated by Tracy Odom. Chapter 1. The Long Branch Saloon didn't open for another hour, but how could anyone resist Santa Claus peering through the window, tapping on the glass? Sophia wiped her hands on a bar towel and went to let him in, and he beamed a smile at her. His dimples were very real, and so she thought was his snowy white beard.
"Chilly out there today," he said. "I brought my lunch, but I'm craving a hot cocoa to go with it."
"Hot cocoa it is."
"I'll take it to go," he said, looking around. "You're not open yet, are you?"
"Not quite. I'm just getting familiar with the layout. My first day on the job and all."
"Ah, and here I thought I recognized you. You're new in town?"
"Sure am," she said. "I grew up in a small town a lot like this one, though." At 17, she'd thought she couldn't shake the dust of her hometown off her boots fast enough. At 29 and counting, loudly inside her head, she'd come running to Big Falls, Oklahoma like her tail was on fire. Her dream life had crumbled. This small town was the only place where she had family these days. Coming here had been a knee-jerk reaction, an impulse. Whether it had been a good one remained to be seen. "Sophia McIntyre," she said, extending a hand. Santa pulled off his thin white gloves and clasped her hand in his. It was warm and strong. "You just find a comfortable stool, Santa. You can eat your lunch right here where it's warm. I'll get that cocoa." She went behind the bar and took down one of the heavy stoneware mugs. "Marshmallows?"
"Absolutely."
Smiling, Sophia mixed and stirred and dropped some marshmallows on top, then set the mug full of chocolate in front of her first customer. Santa pressed his palms to the mug and, closing his eyes, inhaled the steam.
Simple pleasures."
She couldn't reply, not having had many of those lately.
"Are you a bartender by trade, Sophie?"
"Sophia," she corrected. "Time will tell, I guess." He frowned at her, but waited for more, and she found herself talking, though she didn't know why. "I worked my way through college and med school slinging drinks. It's like riding a bike. You never forget."
"So you're a doctor, then? My. Small-town girl makes good."
She didn't reply, but he went on.
"What brings you to Big Falls?"
She shrugged. "I have family here. I don't know, it seemed like the best place to be while waiting to hear whether my license will be pulled for the creative way my ex-fiancé was using my prescription pad."
"Oh, dear."
He reached across the bar to pat her hand.
"I'm sorry to hear that, Sophie."
She glanced up at him, shook her head. "Maybe it's not like riding a bike. I think you're supposed to be telling me your problems, aren't you, Santa?"
"Oh, I don't have problems. There are no such things, you know."
"No such things as problems?" She lifted her head, met his impossibly blue eyes.
"Absolutely not. Nothing happens to you. Everything happens for you. That's what I always say. Everything that comes along is designed to help you get where you're supposed to be. If you ask me, you're supposed to be right here. You didn't know it, so life gave you a little nudge."
He sipped his cocoa, his elbow on the bar. She'd seen him from a distance yesterday, when she'd first arrived. She'd been driving her Subaru real slow through downtown Big Falls. He'd been in the park that Main Street encircled, holding court in the pavilion on a red velvet throne. Now that he was up close, her memory tried to tell her he was the same Santa who'd been in her own small town when she'd been a little girl. For just a second, she was 8 years old again, sitting on his knee, looking up at him with wonder in her eyes. But that wasn't very likely, was it? No, not even possible, really.
"Maybe, Sophie. Everything you really want is right here in Big Falls, waiting for you. Maybe you don't belong in New York City after all."
"It's Sophia," she corrected again. Sophia was successful, respected, and wealthy. Sophie was just a country girl with big dreams. And then she said, "You really believe that? A fiancé who's dealing drugs on the side? A criminal investigation and my medical license in jeopardy? All that's happening for me?" He shrugged, sipped, studied her.
"What if it was?"
She was starting to think this Santa Claus was suffering from the onset of dementia. Poor thing.
No, hear me out now, he said, just as if he'd heard her thoughts. Santa knows these things. What if all these recent events happened because your true calling, your true happiness, the life of your dreams is right here in Big Falls?
She frowned, tilting her head to one side and looking into his eyes. I wish that was true.
Don't wish it.
He leaned back a little, sipped his cocoa, and put his mug down. There was chocolate decorating the edges of his whiskers.
I think for right now you ought to try hoping it. Just hope, even if only for the next few days, that everything in your life is happening exactly the way it's supposed to. You might be surprised.
He smiled and chugged the rest of his cocoa.
Gotta run, Sophie. Children are waiting.
Then he slid off his stool and reached into the pocket of his red velvet coat. Sophia held up her hands. Your money's no good here, Santa.
Thank you.
He smiled at her, and something flashed in his eyes. A full-blown twinkle so unexpected she took a step backwards in shock.
Believe the way you believed when you were a little girl, and watch the magic happen. Lots of magic around, especially this time of year.
Then he winked, turned, and walked away. Sophia, stared at the bat-wing doors long after he'd gone through them. She didn't quite know what to make of the Santa who maybe believed a little too much, and yet she couldn't get what he'd said out of her mind. What if her life hadn't just disintegrated by chance or bad luck, or because fate had it in for her? What if there was a reason? And how the heck did he know she was from New York? Small-town grapevine, had to be. Her 3 cousins, the hunks she referred to as the McIntyre men, showed up to open the Long Branch for the evening, and she fell into the rhythm of pouring, stirring, blending. She used to be very good at this job, and in no time it was all coming back to her. She could flip a bottle in the air, spin around, catch it, and pour it, all in one move. She started having fun. People were fond of her Uncle Bobby Joe, who'd built this saloon, and the family he'd married into, the Brands. He and his wife since last Christmas, Vidalia, came in to watch her work and made a big fuss about how good she was at the job. They'd insisted she stay in their guest room while she was in town. They made her feel welcome, wanted. They acted like hosting her for the holidays was a gift to them. A warm feeling started to settle over her, a comfortable feeling, a feeling of home. She hadn't had that feeling since she'd left her own small town all those years ago, after her mom had died. She hadn't even known how much she'd missed that feeling of home, of family. Maybe that crazy old Santa had a point. Maybe she needed to keep an open mind. When she got back to the farmhouse, it was late. She went in quietly so she wouldn't wake anyone up. The place was illuminated by the Christmas lights that twinkled from a huge Douglas fir in the living room and the soft glow of the fireplace. The smell of freshly baked cookies made the air almost taste of chocolate. As she tiptoed through the living room, she spotted Aunt Vidalia in a rocking chair in front of the fire. She was sealing an envelope, and she looked up, smiling when she saw her. "Oh, good, you're home," she said. "I saved you a cookie. It's probably still warm." She nodded toward a plate that held a giant cookie. It was on an end table right beside a soft easy chair. Unable to resist, Sophia sank into that chair. "You're going to spoil me so much I'll never want to leave," she said. The fire crackled and the tree twinkled. She inhaled a mingled sense of evergreen and burning wood, and a hint of peppermint from somewhere. "That's the plan." Vidalia got up and set her envelope on the mantel. Sophia couldn't help but notice the name scrawled across the front. Santa. She frowned, looking at her aunt again. Vidalia shrugged. "I write to him every year and leave the letter on the mantel. On Christmas Eve, I put cookies and milk right beside it, because a little bribery never hurts. And, throughout the coming year, most of the things I put in the letter come to me." Sophia smiled and said, "Like a new set of cookie sheets or pretty new nightgown?" "Oh, sweetie, I wouldn't waste my letter to Santa on such trivial things. No, I'm talking about big things. Healthy grandbabies, happy daughters, the love of my life. Smiling wistfully, she crossed the room, picked up her pad of candy cane-bordered stationery and her red ink pen on the way, and then she offered them both to Sophia. You should give it a try. What is it with this town and Santa Claus? She muttered. Vidalia crooked a dark brow. You have a problem with Santa Claus? Sophia grinned at the intensity in her aunt's eyes. Not on your life. Give me that pen and pad. She took both, said goodnight to Vidalia, and nibbled on her cookie. And then she sat there, alone in the living room in front of the giant, twinkling Christmas tree, and she did something she hadn't done in 20 years. She wrote a letter to Santa Claus. Dear Santa, if it's true what you told me, then that would be amazing. So amazing that I think I have to give it a try. I'm going to hope that maybe everything that's happening to me is for a reason and that it's sending me toward the life I want. I'm going to hope. What do I have to lose? And I figure I need to get clear on what to hope for. So, Santa Claus, here's the life I want. I want... There she paused as a million things ran through her mind. What did she want? She wanted her ex-fiancé Skylar in jail, but that was already a given. He'd been convicted of using her prescription pad to obtain OxyContin and then selling it to addicts. He was only free until his sentencing right after the holidays. The problem was he wouldn't leave her alone. She wasn't afraid of him, but he kept calling, and when she changed her number, emailing, and when she blocked his email, coming over to her duplex and pounding on her door and not leaving until she called the police. After the third time, she'd stopped sleeping at night. It was the pounding on the door part that had made her decide to leave New York. She didn't want anything more to do with Skylar. She just wanted peace. Nodding, Sophia picked up her pen and wrote, I want such a peaceful, serene life that I sleep like a baby every night. That was a good start. What else? What else? I want my good name cleared, the investigation closed, the police to believe I had nothing to do with any of it, and I want the medical review board to find the same thing. Vindication, that's what I want. Her only crime, she thought, had been being a little too naive, a little too hopeful, a little too trusting. She'd had everything she'd ever wanted. A seemingly decent man who wanted to marry her, a respectable position in an elite hospital's oncology department, a crazy salary. But even with all that, she hadn't been happy. She'd been beating herself up for it, too, berating herself for what seemed illogical. Why not be happy when she had everything she'd ever wanted? What was wrong with her? Nodding hard, she realized that despite feeling she should be happy, she truly hadn't been. And she wanted to be. So she wrote, I want happiness, true, deep, lasting joy in my life. She decided this felt really good, this exercise in hope, and she thought maybe she shouldn't have been so hard on herself before. How could she have been happy in the state she'd been in back then? Even before Skylar's arrest and the subsequent revelations. Her job was stressful and depressing. She'd been tied up in knots all the time and hadn't even known it. Not until those knots had started to untie themselves. The drive back to Oklahoma had been like a full-body massage. Her tight muscles felt looser and looser the closer she got. And when she'd stepped out of the car at Bobby Joe and Vidalia's farmhouse just outside of town, she'd been compelled to heel off her shoes and sink her feet into the grass. She'd taken a deep breath and felt 1,000 pounds just ease off her shoulders. That certainly lent credence to Santa's theory that she belonged here. Her career was back in New York, true enough, but she did not want to return to the tension she'd been living unaware. She didn't know what she was supposed to do. Nodding, she bent over her letter and added, I want clarity. I want to know what it is I'm supposed to be doing with my life, and I want it to be something that I love, using my skills, but without all the stress and tension I had before. This was good. Her letter was coming along beautifully. But there was one last thing, the obvious one, and the most difficult. She wanted love. She wanted the kind of love she saw between Bobby Joe and Vidalia. Uncle Bobby Joe was more relaxed and happier than she'd ever seen him. He looked 10 years younger. Vidalia, a raven-haired beauty of Mexican descent, who had cheekbones to die for, obviously adored him. She had 5 grown daughters and would make Sophia number 6 if she'd let her. She was the living proof that 50-something was the new 30-something. Sophia had loved her on sight. The two of them together it was just amazing to watch. They interacted like cogs in a wheel, like they were sharing a brain, and they were a unit that was far more than the sum of its parts. It was supernatural, the power of what was between them. Damn, she wanted that. To think she'd been about to settle for something that wasn't even close. What a narrow escape. Nodding, she added it to her letter. I want love, she whispered as she wrote the words down. I want true, deep, crazy, passionate, beautiful, heart-racing, soul-filling, breathtaking love, Santa. And you know what else? I really don't want to go through the holidays without someone special to share them with. And then she wrote a little more. I'm going to try hoping this really works, just like you said, Santa. And if it doesn't, you're never getting free cocoa from the Long Branch again. And then she signed it. Love, Sophie. Frowning, she looked down at what she'd written, surprised to find that she'd signed Sophie and not Sophia. She started to try to make the E into an A, but something made her stop. She put the pen down, then picked it up again and added, P.S. Just kidding about the free cocoa. Then she folded the letter and tucked it into a plain white envelope, but she didn't leave it on the mantel or seal the envelope. There were still several days before Christmas, and she might just need to edit it. She held her letter to her chest, closed her eyes, and said, Okay, Santa, here goes nothing. I really, really hope this works. Ball's in your court, big guy. Bring on the magic.